celebrate Oglethorpe Day 2019. Behind me is the set for our theater department's upcoming production of Much Ado About Nothing. It has nothing to do with what we're doing today. But today I hope we will all make much ado about something. So I have to admit, growing up in the North, that James Edward Oglethorpe was not a household name, not a name known to me when I was in primary school. I think if you grew up in the state of Georgia, that you covered Georgia state history, maybe in the 3rd or 4th grade, and so I suspect the name of Oglethorpe was at least known to you then. But that said, I don't actually know what they would have taught you about James Edward Oglethorpe back when you were in 3rd or 4th grade. I suspect you learned at the age of 26, he ran for and was elected to the British House of Commons, a seat that had been held by his father and his 2 older brothers. James Edward Oglethorpe was born into nobility. Clearly, you would have learned that he founded the colony of Georgia in 1733, landing near Savannah with just over 100 men and women. And I suspect you probably also read he was a general after all, and he was a soldier and a fighter, and we all, I think, know of the famous Battle of Bloody Marsh. But I wonder how much you were taught about how rebellious he was, how he challenged the order of the day, first as a prison reformer, and then in opposition to the institution of slavery, which was very much the status quo of the day. As I said, he came from privilege, yet he found it abhorrent that tens of thousands of British citizens were being locked up in jail simply because they were poor and owed a debt of money to another. This was mass incarceration of the 18th century. He devoted his early years, at an age not much older than our students who are here today, to freeing those citizens from prison and returning them to society where they would have the opportunity to contribute. And then he dreamed up the idea, literally dreamed up the idea of bringing the less fortunate, bringing those citizens that had been freed from prison to the New World, to live in a community that would practice religious freedom, that respected the rights of Native Americans, and that banned the practice of slavery, the only Georgia colony in the entire world at that time to do so. So today I don't actually know what elementary students in Georgia learn about Oglethorpe, but as I think about what we do teach our children and what we have taught our children, I was reminded this morning as I was watching TV, the morning news, and watching Spike Lee be interviewed about his movie, that 2019 is the 400-year anniversary, if that's a word that's appropriate to use in this case, of the year that the first slaves were kidnapped, tortured, and brought to America 400 years ago. And that 10 of the first 12 American presidents were slave owners, all the way up until 1850. And I wonder if those things are being talked about and being taught to our children. As I said, Oglethorpe came from a privileged class, like so many of those presidents, and yet well before 100 years before our American Civil War, he knew that slavery debased not only the slave, but the slave owner. He was an activist, a rebel. He saw injustice, spoke out against it, acted out against it. And for me, Oglethorpe Day today is a day where it is completely appropriate to acknowledge the injustices that exist in our own society, in our own country, and in our own community, and to speak out against them. America has the highest rate of incarceration of any country in the world, close to 2 million people in our jails and prisons, disproportionately people of color. We have 4% of the world's population, yet over 20% of its prisoners. And our own state of Georgia is currently first in the nation, or or worst in the nation, in the number of persons under supervision. So that is people in prison, people in jail, people on parole, and people on probation. So today you will hear one story of injustice, an appalling case of injustice. And make no mistake, it's a case that tells the story about race in America. But do know there are thousands of other stories that go untold. So I'm going to invite Jesse Storr to the podium. Jesse's a junior, a biology major, a business minor. He's going to introduce our speaker. He serves as president of Step Up Change, a student organization working to guarantee that Oglethorpe is an inclusive space for everyone. Last spring, Jesse spoke at LASS, our Liberal Arts and Science Symposium, in a session on examining social inequalities, race, gender, and class. So please join me in welcoming Jesse to the stage.
We have an amazing guest today. The story you're about to hear speaks to the core values of perseverance, faith, love, and character that we all strive to embody. For 30 years, an innocent man is on Alabama's death row. For 30 years, justice was not served. But with the help of the Equal Justice Initiative, a good man was given a second chance. He now travels nationally and internationally to speak about his experience and inspire people all across the world. His inspirational memoir, The Sun Does Shine, How I Found Life and Freedom on Death Row, was released March 27 of 2018 and is undoubtedly one of the most inspirational stories of strength and determination you will ever come across. Brian Stevenson, who is a lead attorney, said race, poverty, inadequate legal assistance, and prosecutorial indifference to innocence conspired to create a textbook example of injustice. I can't think of a case that more urgently dramatizes the need for reform than what has happened here. With that being said, we're going to show a quick video to give a little bit more information about the speaker.
For 30 years, Anthony Ray Hinton was a dead man walking.
Thank you, Steve-O. Thank you, Lord.
The prosecution seemed leaning to take my life from me.
58 years old, Hinton lived more than half his life inside a cage, Holman Correctional Facility in southern Alabama. Today, he's seeing and experiencing things for the first time in decades.
Oh my goodness.
He is welcomed home, a party in his honor, hosted by the Equal Justice Initiative, led by attorney Brian Stevenson and his team of attorneys, who fought for decades to win Hinton's freedom.
Thank you for giving me my life back. Just being here as a team, you can say that you got an innocent man off death row.
His nightmare began in 1985. Ronald Reagan was president, Back to the Future was a box office hit, and Under the Cover of Darkness, two Birmingham restaurant managers were shot dead at closing time, just months apart. A third victim, another man who survived the shooting and helped identify 29-year-old Anthony Ray Hinton as the killer. You're a free man now. What does that mean to you?
I mean everything. I mean, you never think about your freedom until it's taken away from you. You couldn't put a price tag on it. They got my $12 back already.
So much about the world has changed, but the greatest still is a world without his mother. She died while he was locked away.
They kept getting no love from me. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm proud of it. That's what's the love of my life.
He goes back to the home they shared together, now abandoned.
Kind of hate to see it in this shape.
It's his first time there since the night it was all taken away. This is the room where Hinton's mother kept her .38 caliber revolver. Police said it was the murder weapon. Hinton's court-appointed public defender hired a supposed ballistics expert to dispute the prosecution's claim about the murder weapon. A persuasive expert, he was not.
So his ballistics expert was blind? In one eye, yes, that's correct.
He had to ask how to turn on the machine. He couldn't see it. He had to ask, somebody please help me. So when they put him on the stand as my witness, they crucified him. I said, they're gonna find me guilty.
Hinton was sentenced to death. He was ordered to spend the remainder of his life in prison, living inside a 5-by-7 cell.
Pretty much sleep in a fetal position because your feet hang over the bed. You only have a bed that is mounted to the wall and a toilet. And that's what I lived in for 30 years. They took my 30s, my 40, my 50, but what they couldn't take was my joy. I couldn't do a thing about the years, but I could control my joy.
53 inmates were executed at Holman while Hinton was on death row.
My darkest memory would be seeing so many people that I got to know be executed.
He languished in prison for years before his case reached appeals court.
I had never been so convinced of someone's innocence than I had in Mr. Hinton's case. No one asked.
Judge Subel Cobb was one of those appellate court judges who believed his story.
There was no incriminating evidence. He didn't have anything from the robbery. There were no fingerprints.
This is extremely unusual.
His appeal was denied, but his team kept fighting.
We'd exhausted every state court appeal, and it was the United States Supreme Court that finally intervened.
The result was a new trial the Bray Hinton had been waiting for. But just a few weeks ago, the state of Alabama dropped the case after a new look at the evidence could not match the bullets to the gun, and Hinton was released.
Since I've been locked up 30 years and finances is tight, $5 a slice.
I don't sense any bitterness. Why is that?
Bitterness kills the soul. I cannot hate because my Bible teaches me not to hate. I've seen hate that is worse. What would it profit me to hate?
And huge welcome to Mr. Anthony Ray Hinton.
I cannot tell you what 30 years of pure hell was like in the time that I've been given. But as you sit there, I want you to think about how long 30 years is. Today, I wish I could look every one of you in the eye and tell you that the state of Alabama made an honest mistake. I wish I could tell you that class and race had nothing to do with me for spending 30 years in a 5-by-7, for 30 long years. The prosecution knew that I was innocent from day one. The prosecution was able to get a conviction on me because of his personal racist view. We must ask ourselves what type of system we have when innocent men and women go to prison, but yet we send them to death row. The state of Alabama had every intention of executing me for a crime they knew that I hadn't committed. And if I hadn't been blessed by God to receive his best attorneys, there is no doubt in my mind that the state of Alabama would have executed. It is sad to say that race played the most pivotal part of me spending 30 years in this hell. I was convicted because my ballistic expert was blind in one eye. And he really wasn't a ballistic expert, he was a civil engineer. but yet that is what the court allowed me to have. And when I came across a man by the name of Brian Stevenson, I asked Mr. Stevenson, could he find me a ballistic expert? And I told Mr. Stevenson that the state of Alabama is saying that the gun they got from my mother home is the murder weapon. And I said, if no two guns is alike, I know already that the state of Alabama is lying. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to hire a ballistic expert. And he looked at me and he said, well, I was going to do that anyway. And I looked at him and I said, no, Mr. Stevenson, I'm not explaining myself right. I need you to hire a white man. And I needed this white man to be the best of the best. I need this white man to believe in the death penalty. I need this white man to just tell the truth. Mr. Stevenson asked me, why did he have to be white? And why did he have to be a male? I said, Mr. Stevenson, I lived in the state of Alabama all of my life. And you can go out there and get the best white female in the country. But once you bring her to Alabama and put her on that witness stand, her testimony is no good. I said, Mr. Stevenson, and it definitely cannot be a person of color. Mr. Stevenson went out and found 3 world-renowned known experts. These experts testified 98% of the time for the prosecution. Never had they ever testified for the defense. I asked Mr. Stevenson, did he ask these 3 men, would they just tell the truth? And they assured him they would tell them exactly what the evidence said. They came to Alabama on 3 separate occasions. They did their finding, and all 3 of the experts tried to make the gun match, and it still wouldn't match. Once we received the news that I already knew, we took this new evidence to 3 different attorney generals. And every attorney general refused to take 1 hour to re-examine the evidence. Did the state of Alabama not review the evidence because they already knew that the bullets didn't match? Or did the state of Alabama was so willing to kill me because I was born black? Believe me, I have tried to believe that the state of Alabama wasn't willing to kill me because I was black. But the truth of the matter, that is exactly what the state of Alabama wanted to do. I never will forget, as I sit there in that courtroom, and after I was found guilty, the prosecution made an outburst remark. The prosecution said, we didn't get the right nigger today. But at least we got a nigger off the street. And I had to go and spend 30 years in a 5x7. The state of Alabama had every intention of executing me for a crime they knew that I didn't commit. The state of Alabama was seeking justice in every one of your names. The state of Alabama was going to execute me in your name. And since the state of Alabama was going to execute me in your name, I come here today to ask you a question. spending 30 long years for a crime that I didn't commit. After waking up every morning and going to bed every night with a death sentence over my head, I come here to ask you one question. Now, where's my justice? Who do I get justice from? And how do I get justice? You telling me that we have a system that we can just go and pick whoever we want, put them on death row for 30 years, and no one have an answer how we repay this man justice? If this is the system that you young people are going to have to inherit, I truly believe that this is a system that is badly broken. I often ask people, what if I had been your father? What if I had been your brother or someone you love? How would you feel that we have a system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent? Ask yourself, what type of system do you want to inherit? What type of system do you want your children to inherit? This is a bad system. I never will forget, on my way to jail, the correction officer looked at me and he said, there's 5 things that are going to convict you. He asked me would I like to know what they are, and I said yes. He said, number 1, you're black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him. Whether you shot him or not, I don't care. He said, number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury. He said, do you know what that spells? And he repeated the word conviction, 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 conviction. And on December the 17th, 1986, they transported me to home correction facility where they housed death row inmates. And for the next 3 years, I did not speak to another human being for 3 years. I was so full of hate, so full of disappointment. I couldn't believe that a system that I had once believed in was as bad as it have shown me to be. How is it that we have a system that if you don't have the money to hire the right defense lawyer, chances are you're going to prison? I want to ask you these questions. I want you to think for a moment when I leave, let this play in your head. What would you do if they came for you? What would you do if you didn't have the money to hire a decent defense? What would you do if you passed the polygraph test, but they cared more about the color of your skin than the merits of the case? What would you do if you've been sentenced to death? What would you do if you had to spend the rest of your life in a cell the size of your bathroom? What would you do if you've been waiting all your life to die and finally you were set free? Who would you be? Because every morning I have to ask myself, who am I? I know that I'm not the person that I was at 29. For 30 years, something inside of me is not right. And then the state of Alabama no one in the state of Alabama have had the decency to say Mr. Hinton was sorry. I want you young people to realize that you are inheriting a system that my generation and the generation before and the generation behind me failed to correct. I truly believe that you hold the key to making this system the way it should be. Race should never play a part in who goes to prison and who don't go to prison. But for 30 years, the state of Alabama set forth every opportunity they could to deny me a chance to go and fight. And finally, it was the United States Supreme Court who ruled that I was entitled to a new trial. And when I go back to the court, the prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, we have lost the gun in question. The judge gives the state of Alabama time to find the gun. We go back at a time that she said, they stands up and say, Your Honor, it is with deep happiness that we inform this court that we found the gun. But it is with great sadness once again that we inform you that we have lost the bullets that goes to the gun. And all of this time I'm still sitting in this fire myself, thinking, what is the state of Alabama willing to do next? And while we were thinking that the state of Alabama was looking for the bullets, the prosecution called one of his experts that testified 30 years ago to come back and look at the bullets one more time. He came back and he was quoted in the Birmingham News as saying that the bullets do not match the way that they matched 30 years ago. But I'm here to tell you that bullets do not change. Bullets are like fingerprints. They stay the same. It is sad to say that my life was not worth the state of Alabama telling the truth. And every day I have to live with the fact that you have the ability to change something that has been broken for generation after generation. How is it that I was able to withstand 30 years of knowing that I was innocent? For one reason, I've always had faith. For another reason, I was able to take my mind and I controlled my mind and made my mind believe that I was free. One day, as I was sitting on that bunk that was way too small for me, I used to be real slim. But since I've been home, everybody want to take you out to dinner. And the first thing I come up here and she want to take me to dinner. But in those 30 years, I sit on that bunk bed and I looked at my body and I told my body that the mind had to leave. It was as though my body looked at me and said, do you promise to come back? And I told my body I had to come back. I had to come back, if nothing else, to check on the case. And once my body gave me permission to leave, I decided that I would go to England. Please, later on, do not ask me why. But I wanted to go see Queen Elizabeth. And I tell people to this day, I don't know why a 29-year-old black man would want to go see Queen Elizabeth, but I did. I showed up in my mind at the palace and I told the guard to tell the Queen that I was there. The Queen told him to bring me in. We sit down, I introduced myself to the Queen, and the Queen And I talked about Prince Charles, Prince Harry, Prince William, and the tragedy of Prince Di. About 40 minutes into this conversation, the Queen realized that she hadn't offered me anything to drink. The Queen stands up and looks at me in her British accent. She said, "Mr. Hinton, would you like some tea?" And I told the Queen I would love some tea. And the Queen said, "What would you like in your tea?" And I told her a spot of lemon. She tells the butler to go out and get this lemon, and I put it in my tea. I drank my tea and we talked some more. I stand up and tell the Queen that I must be leaving. And now that I realize that I can leave death row at any point and any time I want to, I decided that I would do something that I said at 12 years old I would never do. I decided that I would get married. But I didn't just marry anybody. I married the beautiful and talented actress Halle Berry. Halle Berry and I stayed married for 15 long, beautiful years. And Halle Berry, if there's a such thing, Halle Berry was the perfect wife. She didn't never say nothing but yes, dear, okay, dear, or whatever you want to do, dear. But what I love most about Halle, she didn't spend any money. Then going into the 16th year, the state of Alabama did something that it never had done. They showed death row inmate a movie. And the movie was called Speed. And for the first time, I laid my eyes on the beautiful and talented actress, Sandra Bullock. Sandra Bullock was driving this bus around and around and around. And I looked at her. I looked at Sandra Bullock. Looked at Sandra Bullock, looked at her. It was as though I was at a tennis match. I really was building my nerves up in my own little private world to tell Halle some sad news. As I seen Sandra Bullock driving that bus, I looked at Halle Berry and I said, I'm going to divorce you. I'm going to marry Sandra Bullock. And the reason that I'm marrying Sandra Bullock, if she can drive a bus that good, imagine what she could do in a real getaway car. And true to her word, Halle said, okay, I understand you. I had to use my mind in order to free myself from this life ahead. I've been home 4 years. Ever since I've been home, I have went everywhere that I have been invited to share my story. I've had the pleasure to write the second best book that ever been written. The sun does shine. And believe me, the sun have truly shined on me. I never thought that I would ever meet the likes of George Clooney, his lovely wife. I never thought that I would get the opportunity to meet Oprah Winfrey. Not only did I meet Oprah Winfrey, I had the privilege of going to live with her for 2 weeks in her Malibu home. Oprah Winfrey and I have agreed, I just signed the paperwork, she will be turning this book into a movie. As I said, I don't have a lot of time. But when you read this book, there's a story in this book that is important to me. It is about a man, a young man, that was a Ku Klux Klansman. All of his life, his father and mother and community taught him to hate. One day, his father gave him an order. His father was a wizard in the clan. And his father gave him a command to go out and kill the first African-American male he came across. He came across a 19-year-old mentally retarded black male. They befriended this black male and got him in the car, and they stabbed him 65 times. And that wasn't enough. Henry got out and threw a rope over the power line, and Henry hung. That wasn't enough. Henry went in his pocket, got his knife out, and cut the black male's genitals off. And that seemed to satisfy Henry. Then Henry was apprehended. Henry was found guilty of capital murder. We live in a country where we say that it takes a village to raise a child. That sounds good coming off the lips. But I am often asking you, where was this village when this young boy was being mentally abused? Where was this village when Henry went to school and used every racist slur that he could think of? No one called Child Protective Service because it's not against the law to use racist slur. But this village that should have been looking after this boy said that this would be a better world if you wasn't in it. And when Henry came to death row, I had no idea who Henry was. We formed a friendship. And when I found out who Henry was, I asked myself, did it matter? And I had to be honest with myself, and I said it didn't matter. I began to talk to Henry about race. Other African Americans on death row treated Henry with respect and love. And then the state of Alabama, 15 years later, set Henry an execution date. In Alabama, you were asked two things on the night of your execution. What is it that you want for your last meal? And do you have any final words? Well, for whatever reason, Henry wanted an 8-ounce steak. And I looked at Henry and I said, Henry, you ready to die? He looked at me and he said, why would you say that? I said, that's all you want? Is an 8-ounce steak? He said, yes. He looked at me and he said, Ray, can I ask you something? I said, yes. He said, if it ever come your time, what is it that you're going to order? I said, Henry, what I want, they're going to have to go to the forest and get it. I said, and when they go out in the forest and bring it back, I'm going to say, that ain't what I want. I said, when they take it back and come back to something, I'm going to say, that is not what I want. I said, Henry, in other words, if there's a law that says that they can't execute me until I eat my last meal, I said, Henry, I'm going to be here forever. Henry ate that 8-ounce steak. They put the microphone, they lowered it, and they asked Henry, did he have any final words? And Henry said, all of my life, my mother, my father, my community, they all taught me to hate. And the very people that they taught me to hate are the people that showed me and taught me what love is all about. And Henry said, so tonight, I leave this world knowing what true love feels like. I often wonder what it is about us that makes us dislike one another. I told some of the staff today that for 30 years on death row is the only place that I have ever been and didn't experience any racism. And I think that is sad, that you have to go to death row not to experience any racism. For 30 years I had to forgive. I had to forgive the very men that put me on death row simply because they was racist. And they was given the opportunity to do as they please. I often ask myself why and how is it that racist people can get in a position that they shouldn't be in. And then I realized they get in these positions because you don't take the time to go vote. Had the people went and voted, this district attorney never would have been in office. I believe in you young people so much that I brag about this generation every day with somebody. I argue about this generation with somebody every day because I don't believe you're spoiled. I don't believe you're lazy. I believe you're looking for someone to challenge you. And I'm here today to challenge you to make justice what it should be. I'm here to challenge you that do whatever you can out of humanity. Do whatever you can because inside of you live compassion. Never be afraid to show that compassion. 30 years of pure hate. Now I get a chance that I have actually sit down and had tea with the Queen. I have a picture in my bedroom of me and the Queen sipping tea. I tell anybody, when you come to my house, you can look at it, but you can't touch it. I never knew that my faith would carry me the way it had carried me. I've had the privilege to go to just about every college in America. And I tell young people, please do not make me wrong. I leave you, asking you to stand up when you're being told to sit down. Talk when you're being told to be quiet. Always stand up for what you believe in. Always be willing to die for what you believe in. I wish I had the time to tell you the whole story. But just since I can't tell you the whole story, rush out of that door and go find this book.